Well, we're here to find out whether Jews go to heaven. But I want to start out with a story that assumes it's true. A Jewish man gets to heaven and he's being given a tour of the whole place. He's very impressed. He sees Christians and Muslims and Buddhists and everybody getting along. It's amazingly harmonious and peaceful. And then he notices in one corner of heaven, there's this walled off section with no windows. And he says to his tour guide, "What's the deal with that section? That's all walled off. There's no windows." "Oh, that's for the Orthodox Jews. They think they're the only ones here." You see, for them, it wouldn't be heaven if everybody got in because they'd be wrong. They would have not been right that they were the only. Now, you could tell this joke with Catholics, with fundamentalists, you can fill in the blank for which group would only find it heaven if only they were there. But some would argue that the Jewish man taking this tour of heaven might be surprised to be there in the first place, since many people think Jews don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in a heaven or hell. And if there is reward or cosmic punishment, it happens in this life. If you think about the metaphor of the book of life, which for some people is taken literally as something that's written on Rosh Hashanah and sealed on Yom Kippur, the concept is that it defines who's going to live or die in this life during the next year. And the goal of apologizing and atoning and asking forgiveness is so that you'll get another year of life in this world. The traditional blessing that you wish people on the Jewish high holidays is Tekatevu v'techatemu. May you be written and may you be sealed in the book of life for another year. But life in this life, not life in an afterlife. And if you look at the description for the destruction of kingdoms in the Hebrew Bible, it's because of the sin of the kings, even if it was centuries before. It's not a focus on an afterlife, it's a focus on this life, period. However, Jews have believed in an afterlife, and many groups of humans have believed in an afterlife. And so we might ask, why is it that so many cultures, so many religions have some belief in some kind of an afterlife, even an individual afterlife, not just a kind of collective spiritual existence? And so here are a couple possibilities. The first possibility is that maybe it's true. Maybe there is some kind of an afterlife out there, and that's why so many cultures talk about that. Now, there are plenty of other things that many cultures believe that may not be true. So that's not an automatic answer, but it's a possible answer. Now, the second is that the idea of an afterlife might meet important human needs. So, for example, we're afraid of dying. We don't like the idea that there's an end to our personal consciousness. And so maybe we believe in some kind of afterlife because we don't want this life to be the only life there is. There's the pain of loss. When someone you really care about and are attached to dies and you've lost them, maybe believing that you'll see them again or that they're still watching you in some way is a comfort to you. And so it inclines you to believe in some kind of an afterlife. It could be that there's a desire for justice. After all, if Hitler gets to just die and that's the end of it and there's no punishment, then how is that fair? Or if my child who was 10 years old and died tragically, they just died and that's the end. That's not fair. So our passion for justice might be projected onto the universe so that if things are not fair here, maybe on some other plane or in some other existence, they're made right. There is a justice if there's another existence to solve the problem. It could also be that we have dreams or experiences of the dead after they're gone, and we want to make sense of that. It could be a coincidence that our brain connects. I use the example of when you get in the car and you're humming a song and you turn on the radio and it's playing the song you were humming and you're amazed. But how many times have you been humming a song and turn on the radio and it wasn't the same song? You don't notice those. You notice the connections. So maybe those connections of we think of someone and then we see something that reminds us of them. We are connecting the dots, or we have a dream and they appear to us in a dream and we feel like it's really there. And maybe that's a way to try to explain that ongoing presence feeling that people have. And one other purpose to an afterlife, this is perhaps a little bit more calculating, you might even call it Marxist. If you want to maintain a stable society, You can threaten or promise people with reward or punishment in a next existence. Think about the caste system in India or in Buddhism, where if you're on the lowest caste, which stinks to be one of the untouchables, it's terrible, it's cruel, it's brutal, but if you obey, if you accept, then maybe on your next round of reincarnation, you get to move up and you'll have a better existence. So it encourages a quiescence among the lower or more put upon classes if there's an afterlife to threaten them with going down or to promise them with moving up. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, which is our earliest collection of Jewish thought, there is a pretty clear statement that this life is all there is, in at least the Torah, but also in other passages in the Hebrew Bible. And if there is an afterlife, it's nothing like a heaven and hell that we have been promised in conventional religion. Think about in Genesis chapter 3, after Adam is made and then death comes in the world, and it says clearly, from dust you come, to dust you return. That's it. At the end, you decompose and you go back to the earth. You can even hear it in the name. Adam in Hebrew means man or humanity, but it literally means earthling because Adamah is earth, like ground, soil, dirt. So the Adam comes from the Adamah. There's a clear resonance between those two verbal concepts. And in the Hebrew Bible, there is an underworld, but it's a lot more like Hades. It's sort of shadowy, it's murky. You're sort of a ghost, a shade. When Jacob is mourning Joseph, he talks about how he's going to die and go down into the pit, into the grave. This underworld is not attractive. Ecclesiastes talks about landing where the spirit goes at the end, and it's not someplace you want to go. So here, Ecclesiastes is talking about what he sees under at the end of life. This is starting in verse 16. I saw under the sun, in the place of justice, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that wickedness was there. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and every work. I said in my heart, as for the sons of men, God tests them, so he may see that they are themselves like animals. For that which happens to the sons of men happens to animals. And here's the key part. Even one thing happens to them. As the one dies, so the other dies. Yes, they have all one breath, and man has no advantage over the animals, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the earth, the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows the spirit of man, whether it goes upward, and the spirit of the animal, whether it goes downward to the earth? Therefore I saw there is nothing better than a man should rejoice in his works, for that is his portion. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? This life is it. And after you're done, you're down into dust. Or you're down into this underworld that's not particularly attractive. And this is reflected in a story later in the Hebrew Bible, in the first book of Samuel. The prophet Samuel has died, and King Saul is about to attack the Philistines, and he's looking for some kind of consolation. So he tries consulting the Urim and Tumim, which is these sort of oracular dice. The prophets aren't speaking to him. And so finally he finds a woman who can speak to the dead, which he's outlawed. So she's sort of in hiding. He disguises himself, and he goes to meet this woman. And he says, consult to me by the familiar spirit. Bring to me the one I will name you. And she says, Saul has prohibited this. What are you going to do? You're trying to kill me? Okay, don't worry, he says, it won't be a problem. Who shall I bring up? Bring up Samuel. When the woman saw Samuel, notice the verb, bring up, right? There's a sense of he's down below. Now let's bring him up. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried with a loud voice, and she spoke to Saul, saying, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king says, don't be afraid. Who do you see? I see a God coming up out of the earth, a supernatural being. What does he look like? An old man comes up. He's covered in a robe. So in Sheol, the afterlife, you don't get to be young again, okay? You die like you die, and you stay that way. And Saul perceived that this old man coming up, this ghost, was Samuel. He bowed with his face to the ground to show respect, and Samuel's cranky. He says, why have you disturbed me to bring me up? Saul says, I'm distressed. I'm not getting any word of what's going to happen in this battle. Samuel says, why then do you ask me, since Yahweh has departed from you and become your adversary? He's done to you as he spoke by me. He torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to David because you didn't obey his voice. Therefore, he's done this thing to you, and he'll deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines. And tomorrow, you and your son will be with me. Implication, gone. And so Saul is terrified because of his words. And in any case, the point is that the apparition of Samuel is clearly this underworld presence that has made its way back up into the world, but is not designed to be there, offers some insight into the future, but not consolation, no happy ending. It's a Sheol, it's an underworld, a Hades kind of shadowy existence. Now, the big shift in Jewish life happens around 200 BCE, and we call it 160 BCE, and that's during the Maccabean period. As you may recall, before the Maccabees have their great victory that's commemorated in Hanukkah, there's a persecution where the Jews are being persecuted for doing Judaism. If they study the Torah, they're persecuted. If they circumcise their sons, they're murdered. There's terrible stories of martyrs. And the problem that produced is that it's explicitly contradicting the promises in the Torah. The Torah says, follow these laws and you will live. And exactly the people who are following the laws are the ones who are dying. And the ones who are breaking the laws are the ones who are living. So how can you square that circle? Well, the only way you can square it is to have an afterlife that solves the problem. If they suffer in this life, they'll live in a future life. In fact, you need to obey the laws now to have any hope of making it to the afterlife. So you're answering that justice question, right? How can it happen this way? There is a justice. There's a reward to come. It answers the fear of death. Death is an illusion. Death is temporary. There's going to be some kind of a return. So, for example, in the book of Daniel, which is a very late addition to the Hebrew Bible, probably written around the time of the Maccabean persecution, we know this for a couple of reasons. Daniel has a lot of Aramaic in it, for example, which is a late addition to Jewish life. So here it describes this end of days moment in the beginning of chapter 12 in Daniel. At that time, Michael, who's an angel, will stand up, the great prince who stands for the children of your people. There will be a time of trouble such as never seen in a nation even to that time. At that time, your people will be delivered. Excuse me. Maybe it's a sign, who knows? Okay, at that time, your people will be delivered. Everyone who is found written in the book. And here's the key lines. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine as the brightness of the expanse. Those who turn many to righteousness will shine as the stars forever and ever. So there's a promise of a physical, personal resurrection. The people who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake to everlasting life or everlasting contempt, torment, however you want to translate that. So Daniel clearly is reflecting a kind of resurrection, heaven, hell, judgment kind of afterlife. And so in Rabbinic Judaism, which is an heir to this approach of Daniel, you very clearly have a strong belief in an afterlife. There's a famous story of the heretic rabbi Elisha ben Avuya, who sees a man who breaks a commandment and gets away with it, and another man who observes the commandment and then is bitten by a snake and dies. And he says that this commandment that the guy broke says, and got away with, says if you break this, you're in trouble, and if you follow it, you'll live. And the person who followed it died. And then the commentator, the narrator rather, in the Talmud says, well, if only Rabbi Elisha had heard of the explanation of Rabbi Akiva, who said he will live means he will live in the afterlife. So that's solving the justice problem. But that's clearly part of the mainstream. Some of these fundamental seminal teachers of Rabbinic Judaism, like Akiva, are believing in an afterlife. Or, for example, in Pirkei Avot, which is a collection of the sayings of early rabbis, you have this in chapter 3, section 11. Rabbi Eleazar of Modin said, one who profanes sacred things, one who despises the festivals, one who causes his fellow to blush in public, one who annuls the covenant of our father Abraham, that's circumcision, and who is contemptuous toward the Torah, has not a share in the world to come. And that's that phrase, Olam haba, the world to come, that is introduced in Rabbinic Judaism to describe this afterlife. There's ha'olam hazeh, this world, and ha'olam haba, the world to come. In section 16 in the same chapter, we have another passage. This is by, I think, Shimon ben Gamliel. I can't. Sorry, Rabbi Akiva. These are a collection of Akiva's sayings here. So Akiva said, "Everything is given." This is sort of an extended metaphor. Everything is given against a pledge, and a net is spread out over all the living. The store is open. The storekeeper allows credit, but the ledger is open, and the hand writes. He knows if you've been sleeping. He knows if you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. Somebody's watching and keeping score. Okay? The ledger is open and the hand writes, and whoever wishes to borrow may come and borrow, but the collectors go around regularly every day and exact dues from the man, either with his consent or without his consent. And they have that on which they can rely in their claims, seeing that the judgment is a righteous judgment and everything is prepared for the banquet. So you're earning points, you're losing points, you can borrow against your credit, but at some point you got to pay the piper and the judgment will happen. And are you allowed into the banquet or not? Depends on how you pass the judgment. In chapter 4 of Pirkei Avot, again in section 16, we have one more passage I wanted to highlight. Rabbi Jacob said, "This world is like a vestibule, a hallway, before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the hallway so you can enter the banqueting hall." So this is sort of sealing that metaphor that Akiva was using. The banqueting hall is the reward, the afterlife, the heaven. But right now, we're in the waiting space for that ultimate reality. And so we need to do what we need to do here to merit that access there. And that also means avoiding things that will take away your share in the world to come. In the Mishnah, another collection of early rabbinic teachings, in Sanhedrin section 10, it says, all the Jewish people have a share in the world to come. And it has a proof quote from that in Isaiah. And here are the exceptions. People have no share in the world to come. Someone who says there is no resurrection of the dead from the Torah. Well, that makes sense. If you don't believe in resurrection of the dead, why would you get resurrected? You don't deserve it. Someone who says the Torah is not from heaven. If you don't believe in the revelation, why would you get resurrected? And third, an apikoros, which is a person who ignores rabbinic teachings, a secularist. If you know anything about Greek philosophy, the philosopher Epicurus, which is where Epicurus comes from, was very much a skeptic of gods that intervened in the world. So you can see where the rabbis got that idea. The point is that this world to come, you can merit or you can lose your share. But there is a world to come in rabbinic thought, no question. And there's all kinds of speculations that are scattered throughout the Mishnah and the Talmud about this world to come. There's a primordial creative creature called Leviathan, which is seen as a great sea creature. And they imagine that one of the rewards of being in heaven is you get to dine on the body of Leviathan. That's part of that's like the main dish for the feast, is some kind of great fish. You get to study Torah with God as sort of the highest level. There's even a passage that describes what that experience is like as you move up into heaven. I wanted to jump to that text too. I should probably just keep the window open and keep bopping through my sources here. So here is a collection of sayings about the nature of the world to come itself. The world to come is not like this world. In the world to come, there is no eating, no drinking. So this disagrees with the Leviathan thing, but they're all speculating on a world to come that nobody's been to. So that's part of the challenge. There is no eating and no drinking, no procreation, no business negotiations. Now, I mean, what kind of heaven is it without procreating, right? But okay. No jealousy, no hatred, no competition. That sounds good to me. Rather, the righteous will sit with their crowns upon their heads, enjoying the splendor of the divine presence. They beheld God and they ate and they drank, as it says in Exodus 24 when they go to Sinai. And the promise for the future is made to women even more than men, perhaps. And so then Rav asks, by what virtue do women merit to receive this? How do women earn points? After all, in Rabbinic Judaism, if you want to earn points to go to heaven, you study Torah and you fulfill commandments. But if the women aren't studying Torah, how do women get to go to heaven? Here's the answer. They merit this reward for bringing their children to read the Torah in the synagogue and sending their husbands to study in the study hall and waiting for their husbands until they come back from the study hall. So they get support points by making sure their kids get an education, and this is assumed sons, right? And making sure their husbands go to the study hall and study Torah. So they get like referral points because they send someone else to do the good stuff, and they get like residual points that accrue to them. Now, obviously, from a feminist perspective, this is insulting, right? But this is the world in which they're operating. We also know very clearly that there's this concept of a resurrection of the dead, not just a kind of spiritual plane that you live on, but literally the phrase in Hebrew is techiyat hametim, the re-enlivening of the dead. And there's some speculations about this as well. Do you wake up naked or do you come out with clothing on? What if there was an amputation? Does the limb sort of reappear as you're coming out of the ground? Where do you get resurrected? Do you get resurrected where your grave is and you just pop up out of the ground? Or some speculate you only get resurrected in the land of Israel at the Mount of Olives. And so if you were buried somewhere else, the theory is you kind of roll in an underground tunnel all the way to Israel and then pop up out of the ground there at the Mount of Olives. But that's why some pious Jews moved to the land of Israel near the end of their life so they could get buried on the Mount of Olives and be first in line for the resurrection moment. Also, there was a concept that even if you were waiting for a while, because the resurrection is at the end of days, right? This is like a one-time end of days thing. So you might have to sit in the ground for several hundred years. But the concept, at least in rabbinic thought, is you're not just sort of twiddling your thumbs there. You just sort of go to sleep and then boing, and you pop up, and that's the resurrection. No waiting conceptually. But it's not a becoming angels, living on a spiritual plane. It's very much a physical re-enlivening of the body and a return to a perfect existence, but a physical existence in the world. And in rabbinic thought, there is also a concept of a kind of paradise and a purgatory. It isn't a permanent hell necessarily. The theory is you're burning off your sins, but there is definitely a Gan Eden. Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden, literally translated. But that's seen as a kind of paradise that you're aspiring to get to. And Gehenom, which means the valley of Hinnom outside of Jerusalem, where they used to burn trash, actually, that's the purgatory place. You go to the Gehenom, and that's where you're burning off your sins before you're able to merit moving up. And we can see this reflected in a lot of texts in the Hebrew Bible and rabbinic practice. So this is the second blessing of what's called the Amidah, the standing prayer, which is recited every day and on Shabbat as well. It was praising the power of the Hebrew God Yahweh. And it says explicitly, Mechaye metim ata, you resurrect the dead. You bring life to the dead. You make the wind to blow and the rain to fall. You, again, resurrect the dead. You support the falling, heal the sick. This is a God that can do anything, but especially, as you see at the very end, you bring death and restore life and cause deliverance. And in the summation blessing at the end, Ne'eman ata le'chayot hametim, that you are trustworthy to revive the dead. Blessed are you, God, Mechayeh Maitim, who brings life to the dead. So resurrection is clearly there. In Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, one of them is, I believe with perfect faith that God will bring the dead back to life, and so on. If you go to a traditional funeral, you'll hear a prayer called El Male Rachamim, or El Mole, sometimes they say in the Ashkenazi pronunciation. And this one again refers to a holy existence, a spiritual existence in a Gan Eden. God, who is full of mercy and dwells on high, provide a true rest on the wings of the divine presence among the holy and pure, who shine as brightly as the brilliance of the sky. That's a direct quote from Daniel, by the way. To the soul of so-and-so, who has gone on to their eternity, the Garden of Eden will be their resting place. So the soul has disappeared, and ultimately they will land in the Garden of Eden. shade them forever with divine wings, and bind their soul up in the bonds of life. That's that life after death, that resurrection. If you go to a Jewish cemetery, you'll often see 5 letters written on a grave. It's a Taf, Nun, Sadi, Vet, and then a Hey at the end. And it's an acronym that stands for Titzror Nishmata, may her soul or may his soul be Tzura, be bound up, be Tzrur in the bonds of life, Hachayim, in the bonds of eternal life. That's the concept. Again, drawing from that same phrasing here. It's again a claim of a resurrection and an eternal life being promised. In the later Middle Ages, Jews actually adopted a belief from the surrounding Christian culture that if you would recite the Kaddish for the person who died, you could lessen their time in the purgatory. This is analogous to the Christian concept of buying indulgences that got Martin Luther so mad. You could give money to the church, and that would then buy your loved one less time in purgatory before they got into heaven. The same concept becomes part of Jewish life in that period where reciting the Kaddish on behalf of the person who died earns them points, not just you points, in following their memorial. So all of this belief in a Jewish afterlife and resurrection, again, answers that fear of death, because death is temporary. You just go to sleep and wake up. It answers that pain of loss, because ideally, if your relatives are good, they'll wind up in the right place. And maybe it helps you deal with the pain of losing them too, understanding that they're on the road to someplace better. Now, I do also want to mention another route that many people don't realize is a Jewish concept, and that's resurrection. I'm sorry, that's reincarnation. There is actually a belief in parts of Jewish life in a reincarnation. The Hebrew word for it is gilgul, which is related to the word for to roll or to cycle or to circle. Ma'agal is a circle, legalgel is to roll or to rotate. So in Jewish mysticism, sometimes called Kabbalah, in the 13th century, a book called the Sefer HaBahir, trying to explain what happens to the righteous, actually describes a kind of karmic moving up and down based on a reincarnation cycle. The Kabbalistic rabbi Isaac Luria, who developed a whole school of Kabbalistic thought in Sfat in northern Israel in the 16th century, one of his reputations was being able to discern your past lives in this belief that there was a resurrection. In the Lurianic tradition, Abel was reborn as Moses. Remember, Abel is killed by his brother Cain, but he's reborn as Moses. And then Cain is reborn and purified as Yitro, as Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. So they meet again, but the relationship has been repaired, and now it's supportive instead of conflicting between the two souls that have found new homes in the future. And more broadly, there's a religious concept that all Jewish souls were present at Mount Sinai to accept the covenant. That even sort of in nascent or in a sort of reincarnated way, the Jewish souls that were at Sinai are still present in the Jewish world today. It's sort of how you were bound to this covenant if you weren't there, right? How can you sign a contract if you're not? Well, you were there. Your soul was there in some way, and so you also accepted the burden of following the commandments and obeying the covenant. There is actually a Jewish dating website for more traditional Jews. It's called Saw You at Sinai, which is the belief that your beshert, your promised soulmate, was actually there with you at the Sinai moment, and then you've been reincarnated over centuries to find each other now in Brooklyn in 2026. So in any case, that is part of the Jewish framework or conception of an afterlife, that there might even be a kind of reincarnation possibility. It's not the dominant approach, but it is certainly there. So with all of these sources, prayers, rabbinic texts, and teachings, how did it come about that people thought that Jews did not believe in an afterlife? Where did that come from? How did we lose it? Well, honestly, it's a result of secularization. People aren't going to synagogue and reading that prayer every day. If they were, they wouldn't think you didn't have an afterlife, but they're not going, so they don't know it. Also, the Jews were profoundly influenced by the Enlightenment, beginning in the 18th, 19th century. And the Enlightenment was very focused on evidence, on reason, on science, on rationalism. There was a concept of a human spirit of intellect, but they were very much focused on the physical side and the natural world rather than these supernatural explanations for things. And that approach of naturalism and rationalism undermined the concept of a personal afterlife that's going to be a reward and punishment. It seemed sort of arbitrary and capricious to have a God that would allow that. And on some level, it isn't fair to suffer whenever you're suffering, even if you're getting a reward later. I don't get to torture you now and then give you $50. That doesn't work. It's not fair. So by the late 19th century, the reform movement in America would actually have the courage to say they don't believe in the kind of afterlife that the rabbis actually invented. So I'm going to show you one text that talks about that. It's called the Pittsburgh Platform, which was issued in Pittsburgh, America, of course, in 1885. So the seventh plank of the Pittsburgh Platform says, "We assert the doctrine of Judaism that the soul is immortal, grounding the belief on the divine nature of the human spirit, which forever finds bliss in righteousness and misery in wickedness. We reject as ideas not rooted in Judaism the beliefs in both bodily resurrection and in Gehenna and Eden, hell and paradise, as abodes for everlasting punishment and reward." Now, I find this fascinating that they're saying it's not part of Judaism to believe in these things, even though I just showed you all the sources in Judaism that talk about it. But the Reformed rabbis who were writing this believed that true Judaism was their rationalized version of it, and these were foreign ideas that had been imported from outside at certain points in Jewish history. But I love the fact that they use the Hebrew words for heaven and hell, Gehenna and Eden, to say that these aren't part of Judaism, but they use the Hebrew words for them. But it's this approach that says that's not really what Jews believe. Enlightened Jews, modern Jews don't believe this. And that was the beginning of this concept that Jews don't really believe in an afterlife, that they're focused on this world. There were also certainly secularized Jews, like intentionally, philosophically secularized Jews, not just culturally, sociologically, not going to synagogue Jews, but actually ideologically secular Jews in Jewish communities, including Jewish socialists who were anti-religion. They took the Marxist critique and said it's the opiate of the masses, and we're not going to believe in an afterlife. We're going to make this life better to encourage action in this life. And those secular Jews, the word they used for secular in Yiddish, at least, was the word weltlich, which means worldly, universal, but it also means this worldly. So I'm going to focus on what was Marxism. It was materialism. It was this life, the material world, and not the supernatural realm. So that intentional secularization, that philosophical, even socialist secularization of large numbers of Jews also led to this lack of belief in a spiritual afterlife or even a resurrection. Now, I'll also point out that popular culture has had its influence on Jews. So the concept of a guardian angel, for example, is not part of Jewish life historically, but people hear about it, and so they begin to believe it. The idea of this direct heaven and hell, or even talking to the dead. I see this at funerals all the time, where people will say, miss you, John, and I hope to see you again. Or they say they talk to their loved ones all the time. That's not part of historic Jewish practice. You're not supposed to talk to the dead. When you go to the cemetery, you don't bring flowers as if it's an offering. You bring a stone that says, I was here, but it's not giving them something or showing them something. They're not there until the resurrection in classical Jewish thought. And so that really has affected this concept of a Jewish afterlife, where it's become kind of fuzzy, where some believe in it almost on a Christian model, some don't believe in it and think it's outside of Judaism entirely, and others believe in the classical version of it. But of course, in a humanistic Jewish context, we tend to take a more secular approach to answering these kind of questions, but we still have those needs that were outlined at the beginning. So how do we answer those problems? Well, the maintaining social stability, the caste model, our approach is you don't have to put up with it here and now for a supernatural reward. You can improve life here and now. The whole idea of progress is actually a secular idea, that we don't have to wait, that things aren't by divine design. We can actually change things and make them better. That's human action making a difference. That's humanism at its most basic. The fear of death, well, a secular response to the fear of death is, one, go to the doctor. You try to address illness before it's a problem. And we live longer and better because of human work and discovery and science. But we also focus on the importance of life while you're here. Don't worry about death so much that you're afraid to live. You have to make a meaningful life while you're here in the limited time that we have. And we also aspire to teach people that death is a natural feature of life. It does happen, and it happens to every living thing. So if we get used to the concept of death as something that happens, we're less afraid of it because it's part of the natural course of things. We're more willing to let go when it's time to actually let go. And there is a kind of natural immortality that you can find. It's not your individual consciousness living on, but you live on in Jewish naming traditions and the kind of legacy you leave behind and the memories of other people. So there is a way that your ripple effect continues even if you're gone. The desire for justice, if we're not going to rely on cosmic reward and punishment in the next world, well, we don't rely on lightning either to hit the bad people here and now. We have to be the ones that make justice in the world. We can't outsource it to the universe. We have to make the world fair if we want it to be fair. As for explaining the dreams of the dead, well, we understand the subconscious and memory and how that works now better. We also understand the power of imagination, but most importantly, we understand human beings as emotional, not just rational. And so we have feelings that continue. We still love people who are gone, even if they're not there to reciprocate. That doesn't necessarily prove that there's a supernatural plane that we're connecting to. It's expressing our own feelings that live, beyond our consciousness or our ability to rationalize or control. And finally, dealing with the pain of loss, well, it can help to be honest and say, this stinks. I've said that sometimes to people who've lost family members in tragic circumstances, and they said, it's actually comforting. Everyone's saying they're in a better place. You'll see them soon. This was meant to be. This stinks. This is terrible. It's appropriate to be mad and to hurt. That's empowering for people. I think also we can focus on the power of memory with some distance. When I'm dealing with a family that's had somebody that they've lost, I'll say to them right now, all you're thinking of is the last 2 weeks when they were hooked up to the machines and it was terrible. But in time, you'll begin to remember the good times and the happy times and the many years when they were living their life as best they wanted to live it. You can remember those, and that connects you to them in positive ways. The pain of loss doesn't disappear, but maybe it gets scabbed over or it gets surrounded by those positive memories, and it's not only the negative stuff at the end. Jewish life has a lot of spaces for bringing back memories of people, whether it's the yard site, the anniversary of their death, where you might light a candle. It could be a memorial service. It could be the memorial section of a Shabbat service. There's all kinds of ways that you can remember people, to remember them lovingly, even if it may be painful also to remember the loss. And I guess the most important lesson you can offer is, if the end is the end, you want to have a positive relationship here and now. The more loving connections and the more expressions of loving concern that we offer to each other, the better memories we'll have of the people that we love and who loved us. And that will provide consolation in the face of their loss. It might make it hurt more because we love them more and we know they loved us, but it also comforts us to know that we said that to them and we expressed it to them while they were there to receive it. In Proverbs chapter 10, there's a beautiful statement of loving memory that we use at Kol Hadash all the time. Zecher tzaddik livracha, the memory of a good person is a blessing to us. Or sometimes you might say, when you're talking about someone, you might see in Jewish letterhead Z apostrophe L or Zion apostrophe Lamed. It stands for Zichrono livracha or Zichrona livracha. Her memory is a blessing. His memory is a blessing. If you want to be remembered well, live your life so that your memory is a blessing to other people. And that way, the pain of loss for them the memory will not be painful. The memory will be a positive thing because they'll think of all the good things and good person that you were. So that's, in 40 minutes or so, an overview of Jewish views on the afterlife. I'm curious if you have any thoughts, comments, reactions to all that material and where you land on that spectrum. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
When I think about heaven and hell, which I have from a very young age, one of the first conclusions I came to was that everlasting anything is boring. I mean, what are you going to do forever and ever that's going to be so great that you're going to sacrifice this life and do all sorts of special things for that to have, and likewise, if you end up in hell, I mean, how bad can it be if it can't be much
Your
bad,
friends are
worse
there.
than heaven.
Well, and
Everlasting.
there's also that Billy Joel version, right? I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints.
Yes, there you go. So the idea of reincarnation seems very, very real to me. And you don't have to wait for the judgment day for it. I think that we are born into this life, and I can talk for about 20 minutes on this, and so you can cut me off at any time you like.
Okay.
But
20 minutes precisely.
I don't know. Sharon has stayed here this long, and she's heard it all before. So if I talk too long, she'll get up and leave.
Well,
But
one of the challenges with a lot of these questions of is there resurrection or not, is there a spiritual plane or not, is that it becomes a kind of Rorschach test where different people are going to look at the same evidence differently. And I like to use the story I heard a long time ago about a man who grew up in a religious community, let's say in Texas, and he never really believed it. So one night he goes out into the field and he looks up at the sky and he says, "Okay, God, if you're out there, give me a sign right now." And a shooting star goes across the sky and he says, "Wow, what a coincidence." So if you're inclined to think it's a sign, it's a sign. If you're inclined to think it's coincidence, you're going to read it as coincidence. And it's going to be very hard to convince someone who's sort of oriented in a certain way and looking at stories, evidence, examples to change their mind on that kind of a subject.
well, this story I like to tell on myself is the one that sort of shaped my views forever and ever on this. Is when I was 12 and a half years old. I got a magazine called Science Digest, and I know there's the May June issue of 1961, which I can access online. And in the cover it says, "Do you have ESP?" And try this simple test. And what you do is you take a deck of cards and put the four aces out face up, and then sort the cards just by intuition. And the first time I did it, I sorted five cards, then I sorted a sixth card, but then I moved the sixth card, and then I turned it over again and to see what it was. And all six were right, including the first one, the sixth one where I put it the first time. And I thought, oh, I have ESP. But then after that, I couldn't do, much more than what you'd expect. But what I didn't know at the time, of course, was the odds of sorting five in a row right are 1 in 1,024. Six in a row are 1 in 4,096. Well, I'm at home at that time, and I have a twin brother and sister who are 15 months younger, and a brother 2 years older. We all do the test. Nobody does more than average. But my mother worked, and we always had somebody who came in on Monday morning and left on Friday night, and she took care of us. And at that time, Catherine was our housekeeper, we called her. And she was, I remember her as a young black woman from Louisiana. She said her grandmother was burned as a witch. And Catherine, you do it. No, I don't touch cards. My brother was shot playing cards. I don't do it. Well, we kept after her, and eventually she did it, but she wouldn't touch the cards. She sat across the table, and she'd very slowly tell us where to put eight or nine cards, and we turn them over, and they're all right. Long story short, we would hold them under the table so she couldn't see them. Didn't matter if she missed one, it was towards the end. If once she put seven out of nine cards in the diamond pile, oh, we got her now. No, they were all correct. And if you asked her, how do you do this? She said, somebody's telling me the answer. And looking back on her, she was schizophrenic. I didn't know that at the time, but she talked about they were watching her and she talked about her voices that she heard. And I actually considered going into psychiatry to study schizophrenics, when I went to medical school. And
So, the
my
the
mother,
dilemma becomes what does the story prove? Does it prove a supernatural existence and spirit world where ghosts are speaking? Does it reflect extrasensory perception that we just can't measure yet, or we don't understand within our own human brain. I mean, I've noticed the odd thing that, let's say you're driving on the street and you look at somebody walking on the sidewalk, they tend to look at you when you're looking at them. How do they know you're looking at them? But I mean, maybe I'm remembering the moments where they do and not remembering the moments they don't. But there's part of me that wonders: is there something out of the corner of their eye or some other kind of perception that they're see? So there are things that we haven't yet been able to measure. But does it prove an afterlife? Does it prove a spiritual plane? Does it prove ghosts or resurrection? Again, that's the question of how you're reading that data.
Well, the laws of quantum physics work just as well for 4, 5, and 6 spatial dimensions as they do for our 3 spatial dimensions. So I believe that we are surrounded by another dimension which we can't perceive, but the unfortunate schizophrenics can. I had a lady in my practice. I took care of the medical needs of a number of schizophrenics. I never asked them about their voices, but my nurse did once. Who's talking to you? Well, it's my dead daughter. And the uh, say the this fact opens my mind to the idea that we came from a place and we go back to that place when we die,
So, Richard,
whatever that is and whatever it is.
an interesting challenge they found in studying mystical experiences, right? Where mystics are meditating or they're fasting and then they have a vision and so on. It seems to be that Muslims tend to meet Muhammad
Oh yes.
and Jews tend to meet Moses or David. And you'd think once in a while a Christian would meet Muhammad, or like there'd be some crossover. But what happens is we filter the sort of less than rational experience through our own lens of So the voice she was hearing, she says, is her daughter. It doesn't prove it was her daughter. It's how she's interpreting the voice that she's hearing. She's saying it's her daughter because that's either who she
But
wants it to subconsciously or how her brain is interpreting the data. And this is, I mean, William James writes about this in The Varieties of Religious Experience, in the early 20th, end of the 19th century, that he's not judging whether the mystics are right or wrong. But what he's saying is that we're all filtering it through our own consciousness and awareness and cultural conditioning and so on that is helping to define for us the data coming in. And
but
so that's where it makes it hard to, what does it prove? That's part of the complication there.
but Catherine's voices are telling her which cards are coming up, and that's just defies any. And people say, "Well, you were just a child; you're not remembering right." But I've got 4 other people who would tell you the same thing. And when Catherine left, that story is one weekend when she wasn't there. My mother talked to somebody, talked about getting an au pair who'd come and live with you, and you pay their way over from Sweden. And my mother wasn't going to do it, but Catherine comes to work on Monday and says, "Mrs. Fellers, somebody's robbing me here at home, Catherine. No, here, somebody's robbing me." And for the next 2 weeks, that's all she could talk about, that was she was going to get fired. And she quit. And after she left, my mother told us several stories where she knew things that she had no way of knowing. And my mother was as freaked out about it. Well, as kids weren't freaked out. We were trying to just say, "Oh, well, she has ESP, whatever that is." But it's and at that time, that issue of Science Digest, there was studies going on at the University of North Carolina at Duke. I'm sorry, at Duke University in North Carolina. And J.B. Ryan was doing this study with the cards, and he wasn't able to make any outright statements about it, other than young children tended to do the best. And that was thought because they recently came from this other world and still had connections to it.
See, I would prefer, what makes more sense to me is there's always the problem of inadvertently cueing, like they had the horse that could count when he saw people
Yes,
and and
yes.
couldn't when he didn't. Um, but also, maybe there's a way of perception, but to posit an entire spiritual plane of spirits of the dead seems to me to be more complicated to explore those phenomena.
I,
And anyways, we don't have to get into this
I,
eternally back and forth. But again, the focus is on this concept of an afterlife and a belief in a life after death. And in the reincarnation front, I'm also struck by the fact that people who are reincarnated were never like, ditch diggers. They were Cleopatra. They were famous. Didn't the ditch diggers deserve to get reincarnated? Why not?
Uh,
Um, and again,
Let's
that's
go
one of
through a
those
few
kind of,
cycles.
well, maybe, but that again seems to me that kind of either projection of what you want or interpreting whatever experience is coming through in the way that you want it to be on a subconscious level. When people are doing genealogy, they're always fascinated to find a rabbi in the past, but I'm interested in the metal worker. I'm interested in the schlepper. But the schleppers don't get a lot of love in either ancestry research or in reincarnation studies.
but before you go, Adam, I just want to mention one. There's a program on Netflix. It's called Surviving Death. It's a six-part series. Each one about 50 minutes long. And the very last one is the one I would recommend you watch. It's about reincarnation, and this is about children who remember past lives. And it's at the University of Virginia. There was somebody donated $1 million to study the paranormal. And this is sort of what came out of it. And J.B. Tucker is the guy who um, uh, who narrates this section, and you can actually read it. He's got a book out which I've read, but it's something hard to deny. But so it's on Netflix, Surviving Death, and the last episode. Just tune in that. I think it blow your mind.
Well, I'm sure there are also plenty of stories about it on Christian network television too,
Um,
because people want it to be true,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's the hard part about evaluating this.
Well, when
Um,
they were doing this study, they got 2,500 cases. This Ian Stevenson, who was the original one doing the research, and most of them were from Asia because their belief in reincarnation is quite popular. Whereas
mhm.
in the Western world, we tend to reject that, and people don't want to talk about it. And when their kids say strange things, they try to shut them up. But you're right, it is culturally uh,
Filtered. Yeah.
involved. Yeah.
I always quote Dan Friedman. I love Dan, and he used to say, when somebody comes back and tells me, he says, then I'll believe it. But until it actually happens, it's not so. That's what I quote to Richard.
Well, and yet you're still happily married, so that's good.
Hey, listen,
That.
wait, I think that your point of view is the more socially acceptable point of view, and I consider it normal. But I don't mind talking about the abnormal. And I would also say that most of us have had paranormal experiences in our lives, and we tend not to talk about them. But the other paranormal experience that I had, there was a camp director who was somebody who was important in my life when I was going to camp. And the last time I saw him, I was 16. And 8 years later, I'm a senior in medical school, and I wake up on a Wednesday morning with a vivid dream about Red Powell. And I thought, oh my God, I haven't thought about him in years. I can't believe I had that dream. I mean, it sort of took me aback, and that never happens to me. Well, that weekend, I'm over at my mother's house, and she says, oh, did you hear the news? Red Powell died. And I said, well, I guess I knew that. And I just found out recently, through certain events, that yes, that was a Tuesday when he died, February 17th, 1974. Um, so, and all of us have had the experience of thinking of somebody and then, and the phone rings and there they are. But
Yeah, but when we think of somebody and someone else calls, we don't notice it.
no, no, no. And those are coincidences. And I think a lot of it is coincidence, but that one thing, it's pretty hard to say it's a coincidence.
My son-in-law is a neurologist, and he said what happens, the reason witnesses today are not given the same priorities that they used to is because the memory gets kind of convoluted, and we remember things we want to remember or forget, or
Yeah. The
it's
brain is not a video recorder.
right.
Yeah.
And it's
And
not
they've done this in criminal justice classes where, they have somebody run in and grab the professor's bag and run out, and then they ask the whole class to write a description of the person that did it, and they're wildly different because they were all there for the moment, but what they remembered about the person is
Yeah,
radically different. So eyewitness testimony is
Mhm.
really not reliable
right.
in a court of law. All right. Janet or Johan, any comments, questions? Richard's had a lot to say.
I I was mostly interested because um, as I talk to friends, both Jewish and non-Jewish, and I get asked, well, what do Jews believe? And I really didn't have a good answer. Um, so I wanted to tune in and hear. I I mean, I myself really don't believe in an afterlife, and um, there are times where I think to myself, I wish I could believe that my dad was looking down and would see this moment, but I can't. Um, I have one of my oldest sister is Seventh Day Adventist and um, very observant. And I visited her this summer, and we're very good about you know not talking about this, but stuff slips out, and you know it's we share a father, and I you know wanted to express that I've always believed that if the thing my dad would have loved to have seen was the relationship my sister forged with my mother, her stepmother. And, you know, I know she would believe that he's looking down, seeing very happily. And I want to express that to her, but, I don't want to kowtow and say, oh, dad's looking down. I don't believe that. But it was, so I said it, if I always thought that dad would have loved to have seen this. But it's interesting. Because she very much believes there's a kingdom, the next kingdom is coming, um and I think it's interesting, the belief. She would explain the crap that's and did the crap that's going on in this world. I think this is crap. This proves that no one is paying attention. you know and she firmly believes that the crap is going on so that people will turn to God to save them. And I just thought to myself, wow, you can turn anything into that, can't you? And but she's my sister and I love her, and as long as,
Well,
I find it
sometimes
dumbfounding.
I've had people ask me, what do you do if you go to visit someone in the hospital, let's say? And they'll
Hmm.
ask me, is there a heaven? Am I going somewhere, or is this the end? I'm afraid. They want to have an answer. And what I generally do is I'll ask them, what do you think? And they express what
Hmm.
they believe, and I say, oh, that's interesting. And if they really insist, if they really insist on what do you think, I'll say, well, I think that this life is what there is, and we need to make the most of it, and to, and offer some consolation through that approach, as I talked about. Um, but I don't need to be combative if they're expressing what they
Yeah.
think. Then okay, I don't have to say yes or
Hmm.
no, because if I said
Hmm.
yes, that would be lying to what I think. But if I said absolutely not, that's ridiculous, that wouldn't be sensitive to their needs. So I
Right.
affirm their right to think what they want to think, and if they want to ask me, I'm allowed to think what I want to think, and I'll share it in a kind way. That's generally my response.
Hmm. Yeah.
I think the older we get, we want to not think we're alone. There's something that happens after, well, I noticed in Richard's case, after he turned 75, suddenly there's an afterlife, and you just don't want to be alone.
Well,
You want
maybe his filter went down, and he decided to say what he's been thinking all these years.
oh
Actually, there was an event that set it off. So,
no.
but I won't go into that. All
Okay.
these things I've been working on all my life, but they sort of recrystallized in this last year. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyways, thanks for joining us, and hope
Mhm.
you
Do.
enjoyed this exploration of possibilities in the afterlife. But I will say that there is a humanist angle to this that I've seen actually fundraisers use, where they say you can't take it with you. So, uh, so then they encourage you to, give in your estate or give while you're alive. But then I did a baby naming for somebody who was an art curator, and he was actually doing a curation of funerary art. The statues and the things that would be buried with a person in.
Mhm.
I think it wasn't in Egypt. It was in like Pacific Island, Indonesia, that kind of area. And I thought, oh, you should make the title of the exhibition, "You Can Take It With You." He said, "That's funny, but no, we're not going to do that." All right. Anyways, have a good night.
Now I want to do that. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.